Hello and welcome to the Light and Energy Show with me, Claire Wiles. I'm here today in my Light and Energy Centre in Weymouth with some health foods behind me, as you can see, and today's show is all about foods, Sattvic Foods in particular. And we will be joined by Chinmayi, who some of you might remember from our Reiki show, and she's going to tell us all about the health benefits of eating in the Sattvic way. Welcome, Chinmayi, to the show.
Thanks,
Lovely to have you here. Now, you are a certified integral yoga instructor. Is that right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And you're going to tell us a little bit about Sattvic Foods, which I have to admit I know a little bit about, but certainly not a lot. So I'm really looking forward to finding out more about this. So, what are Sattvic Foods? What does that word mean?
Well, Sattvic means purity, balance, and goodness. So in the yogic and Ayurvedic tradition, we're always looking really to eat Sattvic foods. And most people in the West think about yoga as being a physical practice, an exercise if you like. But actually, yogic philosophy is far wider reaching than that, and it actually includes yogic diet and is a total system for health maintenance.
Right, so a whole way of life, not just one part of the life, that whole person.
That's right.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And we've got some Sattvic foods here on the table. Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of these?
Yeah, sure.
Is these foods, sorry, these foods here are all Sattvic?
All of the foods here are Sattvic, yeah, you're right. So Sattvic means pure, it means natural, not processed. So we're talking about pretty much all vegetables. There are some that are excluded, and we'll talk about those in a bit.
Okay.
And pretty much all fruits as well, but again, there might be one or two exceptions. Nuts, as long as they're fresh.
Yeah.
And quite a few pulses, so brown lentils and beans, pulses that have been soaked and cooked in a healthful way. And also with grains, things like quinoa and rice, oats, and sprouted seeds and grains are also really beneficial, and they're full of so much vital raw goodness, which is what the body really wants to sustain itself.
It's the life force, isn't it, of the plants that we're actually taking in. So in the same way as people that may follow a raw food diet, it's that life force, that energy from that food that we want to take into ourselves to improve our energy, enhance our energy and life force.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because if you look for foods that are natural, they have that energy of the sun within them, then yes, they're going to give you good health. So within this yogic and Ayurvedic system, yogis talk about Sattvic food, which as we know now is pure, but they also talk about the types of foods that we should try to avoid. And those foods are Rajasic. So Rajasic foods are very enervating for the system. Perhaps foods that are too spicy, too sweet, too sour, maybe too bitter. And then also foods that are tamasic, dead, dull. There's no life force in them. So really we can try and avoid those food groups. And I think we're actually going to provide a download for the audience with a complete list of the foods that come into each of those categories. So hopefully then people can start to build their diet and their nutrition around more life-giving foods.
And I think it's always interesting for people to take a look at lists like that and compare it to the diet that they may have now. We have a very tamasic diet here in the West, for example. Lots of alcohol, lots of meat, lots of fried foods, so very dulling to the system.
And a lot of processed foods as well. And even, you know, a lot of us may be on a vegetarian diet, particularly if we live in a household where there are meat eaters as well. You know, quite often that processed food is coming into the diet, and really we should be trying to keep things a little bit more simple, you know, going back to what nature's provided in its natural state. And it doesn't take very long, does it, to just sprout some seeds. I mean, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you've sprouted these seeds today.
Well, this is just sprouted alfalfa seeds here, and today is Friday, and I started sprouting these on Tuesday, so they needed another day, to be fair. So you can just start to see the sprouts coming up here. And of course, when you sprout seeds or pulses, you're actually increasing the life-giving force, if you like. It's a living thing. You're increasing all the enzymes and the nutrients within that little seed, and it becomes a powerhouse of nutrients that's so good for the body. And I always sort of think of sprouted seeds as like having a little greenhouse on your windowsill. Really easy to do. You can do it even with your camping, because in today's world with sprouters such as this, it takes no time at all. You just put your seeds or your pulses into the sprouter, you put the lid on. Every day you put a cup of water on the top and throw the cup of water away from underneath. What could be easier?
Yeah, it's ideal, isn't it? And of course you can use those sprouts with pretty much any meal.
Yeah.
So they make a great salad. You can simply put them together with, you know, some very simple raw vegetables, and it's a really delicious combination. My
favourite, I have to say, is sprouted chickpeas. I think they have a really lovely nutty flavour. And I see here we've got some chickpea flour or gram flour on the table, which is something that I use a lot of, because obviously it's gluten free, and I make sort of a nice what would be equivalent of a pastry base using chickpea flour. Very difficult, I have to say, to roll out. So if you are making a pastry with chickpea flour, you need to press it out rather than roll it out.
And of course, if you do want to make a sort of a tart or a flan, the other alternative is to use nuts, and you can make a nut or seed pastry, which again you can't roll out but simply press into the dish.
So with that, would you just grind the nuts and then mix? Would you use something like ghee, for example, instead of using a normal butter within the pastry?
You could do, but quite often if you use nuts that are very oily, like Brazil nuts, there's enough oil already within those nuts to bind it together. Wonderful. So you don't need to add anything else, but simply just the nuts themselves. And then you can make a very simple vegetable flan.
Very high in protein and of course gluten free, and a nice natural food. Perfect.
And not sluggish for the system. I mean, the other thing that yogis tend to try and avoid are foods that have been cooked and then left to cool. Because those are also considered really dead foods. So that includes things like bread and cakes, and so many of those products that are integral very often to our Western diet these days. But really, anything that has been cooked a long time ago has really lost any vitality, any nutrients, any prana that was there in the first place. And that also goes for leftovers as well. So there's this attitude that really, if we are cooking the food, if we've decided not to have a raw meal, we should try and just cook what we need. And never mind, bulking up, I'll save that for tomorrow, because actually by tomorrow, where have all the nutrients gone?
Absolutely. I mean, from the point of view from nutritional therapy, of course, once something is overcooked, then the B vitamins are lost in it because they're water soluble, and of course the B vitamins are the ones that support the central nervous system. So we've got here rice. Now tell me a little bit about the rice that you've got in the bowl here.
Okay, so this is brown basmati rice. which, as you know, has B vitamins as well within it. So it's far more nutritious than, say, white rice. You could also have wild rice. That would be really good. And sometimes you could even try soaking the rice and then just half cooking it, and you'll retain a lot more of the nutrition.
Very alkalising to the body, because the way it looks to me from a Western nutrition training is it's all very alkalising to the body. So it's actually going to be reducing inflammation. And we were talking a little bit before about working with the liver. This would be a really good way of eating to actually maintain good liver health, would you say?
Yeah, I would think so, definitely. And I think it's interesting that you've brought up the idea of acid and alkaline, because a lot of the foods that are on the rajasic list and so to be avoided are fermented foods, pickles, vinegars. So, and quite a few of the fruit and veg that it's suggested we should avoid are things like lemons and limes, obviously very acid, rhubarb, and then also things like garlic and onion, which I know a lot of people just use automatically in their cooking, and tomatoes. So, you know, it's not to say that we should never eat them, but at least we can just be aware of their effect on the body before we ingest them. And in fact, Gurudev, Sri Swami Satchidananda, who, as you know, was the founder of integral yoga, he was quoted as saying that if you wanted to know the effect on the body of a particular foodstuff, all you had to do was go to the zoo. He said, and just observe the animals that are there. I know that it's so true, isn't it?
True.
If you think about the lions and the tigers and all those meat-eating animals and the kind of temperament that they have, and the way they smell, and then you look at the very pure, gentle vegetarian animals, and how much more sattvic they are naturally. And I think this leads us on to another really important point about our diet. We think so much in the West about how the diet is affecting the physical body, but we maybe don't give so much credence to how it affects our energy. So we've already talked about this concept of life force, this prana, this energy, which is essentially within all these raw foods. But then you have also to think about the effect on the mind. When we eat pure foods, the mind becomes a lot calmer. It becomes clearer. Our thinking is clearer. And so for yogis, of course, that's a huge benefit, because meditation is such a fundamental part of your yogic practice. And when you eat pure foods, it's so much easier to sit and meditate, because you're not putting toxins into the body, so the body isn't stiff, it doesn't get so irritable, and you can just maintain that sense of peace and tranquility, which is, you know, it's always there within us. But then we put in so many other factors that start to stir up the emotions and affect the chemical imbalance within the body. So it's hardly surprising, you know, when you look at the diet and you look at what's occurring globally, you can't help but make some some references.
The clearer the cell is, the more light and photon activity that can go on within the cell. So it makes absolute sense, doesn't it, that the lighter, the clearer the cell, the more connected you may be to the greater force, or whatever you like to call it. But in terms of meditation, much clearer to meditate, the clearer the body is. If we can just talk briefly before we go on to our break about milk, and the fact that I know it's raw milk that is sattvic.
Yes, I mean, it's actually quite difficult to get hold of raw milk in our society unless you have your own animal. But from a traditional yogic perspective, the milk that is best for you, apart from obviously babies with mother's milk, and we all know how good that is milk that is not only raw, so it hasn't been homogenized, it hasn't been pasteurized, it hasn't been powdered, it's in its natural state, but also it comes from an animal that has been lovingly tended. You know, so there's this idea that, you know, there's always respect for the animals. You know, if animals are giving us any of our foods, there's always respect there. And also respect and blessings for everything that we eat.
So thank you, Chinmayi. That's really interesting. After the break, we're going to have a look at how we eat and that very topic of prayers. So join us after the break.
Omana Purne Sada Purne Shankara Prana Valape Yana Varagya Siddhartham Bhiksham Dehi Cha Parvati Mata Cha Parvati Devi Pita Devo Maheshwara Vandava Shiva Bhaktaha Svadesho Bhuvanatrayam Hari Om Tat Sat Brahmaparnamastu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om, beloved Mother Nature, you are here on the table as our food. You are endlessly bountiful, benefactress of all. Please grant us health and strength, wisdom and dispassion to find permanent peace and joy, and to share this peace and joy with one and all. Mother Nature is my mother, my father is the Lord of all. The whole creation is my family, the entire universe is my home. I offer this unto Om, that truth which is universal. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. Welcome back.
Chinmayi, that was beautiful, the chant that you were doing for us there while I was preparing some strawberries. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yes, well, yogis like to do everything with an attitude of devotion.
Yes.
So when preparing food, it's just a really nice idea, whether you follow a yogic path or not, to just put a positive vibration into the food that you're preparing for yourself, for your friends, family, because obviously every thought that we have sends out a vibration into the world. So not only should we eat with the right attitude of mind, but we should also prepare our food and serve it with a loving attitude. And so that chant was the yogic meal prayer.
A real nourishment of mind, body and soul.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. And of course yogis also like to talk about not just which foods we should put into our body and the attitude with which we should prepare them, but also the attitude with which we should ingest the food. And I think that's really important for so many of us in our society. We live very busy lives, we're juggling home, career and families, and you know, maybe sometimes we eat on the go or we don't all sit down together. But really, you know, if we can, it's better to wait rather than eat in a hurry, or to eat when we're stressed or angry or depressed or feeling any emotions which, you know, could be deemed as negative. It's far better to wait and sit down at a time when you're actually hungry, you're not just eating for the sake of it. Because I think, again, maybe within our culture there's a little bit of that going on. You know, oh well, it's such and such o'clock, so I must eat. But am I really hungry? You know, and you know, a lot of people are just programmed to eat and not to listen to their own body and what the body's telling them. And you know, this idea of always having to have 3 meals every day at set times, maybe we do ourselves a little bit of a disservice there. So coming to the food with the right attitude, being grateful and thankful for the food, which is something that people have always done, and yet recently we seem to have forgotten about. So it doesn't have to be the yogic meal prayer. It could be just a very simple thanks. You know, there are lots of lovely ways to say grace at the table, whether you're on your own or whether you're in a big group. And it's a nice tradition for children as well to get back into.
Absolutely.
So also the space in which we eat is important. You know, a clean room, you know, with fresh air as much as we can, and fresh water to sip. Because also we don't want to be drinking huge quantities during the meal. If we do that, then we risk washing some undigested food down into the gut.
Right.
And that's obviously going to cause problems with the digestion. Yogis are always talking about the digestion because they believe that pretty much all of our health problems start there.
And I would, dare I say, quite agree with that.
So, you know, by all means have some water with your meal, but just sip. So if you're going to have big drinks, and you should drink a lot, you know, plenty of fresh liquid, either before or wait until at least 20 minutes after the meal until the food has had an opportunity to start to digest.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. There's optimum digestive juices there. And, you know, it really does make us realise, doesn't it, how much everything with our Western diet, how it's all so wrong for us, how it's, that, you know, right the way down to the fact that if we're buying something that's been in a can, for example, that may have actually not been growing in the earth in the last 3 years, it's been canned, it's been sat there, there's no life force, there's no energy, we rush in from work, we put it in the saucepan, we heat it up, we eat it, we run back out the door. It's no wonder that the body is under so much stress.
Yeah.
And of course there's a lovely sort of school of thought that if you had two things with the same ingredients, and one that your grandmother made for you with love and care, and the other that was bought from maybe a supermarket chain, for example, the one that your grandmother made may have the same ingredients but would nourish you more because of the love and care that went into that.
Very much so.
Yeah. Again, you know, when we're talking about these sorts of foods, it's very easy to prepare raw foods, and we'll also put some notes onto the download of the foods, the Sattvic Foods, of kind of recipes that you may want to use and to try for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Claire, because you very often, we know that we should eat more raw food, more natural food, but we maybe just don't know how to get started with it, apart from a simple salad, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and with the sprouts, again, something that very easily that people could do very quickly as an addition to their diet. And using nuts. There's a lot of, again, within the West, when we talk about nuts, very many people say, oh, but they're high in fat, and they forget about the fact that it's the very good fats and the fact that they're a natural food to eat in moderation.
Yeah, and of course we need some fat in the diet, but like you say, the right sort. And I think you're a big fan of almonds.
That's right, I am, yes. Yeah, very good for balancing the blood sugar level. And I'm interested to hear what you say about the fact of not overeating, eating just what we need, and actually eating when we're hungry, so that we start to register what our body needs rather than what we're told it needs, so that we're listening much more to what's going on within the body. Okay, and we did mention ghee a little bit here. Would you make your own ghee, or do you think it's perfectly acceptable to buy a ready-made ghee, for example?
Well, I think, you know, homemade is always best, but, you know, with all the best will in the world, you know, we have to be practical, we have to function in the world, we have to go out and do other things possibly other than just prepare food. So I think the important thing is not to be too fanatical about anything. Yes, there are some guidelines, you know, within the yogic tradition, but, you know, if sometimes we eat a food that is rajasic or tamasic, you know, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it.
No.
You know, if we have to use some commercially prepared foods, and probably we will do, then that's okay. But it's just this awareness of moving gradually towards a more wholesome diet. And then actually we find that when we eat these types of foods, we probably need to eat less because we're more sustained by them.
So wasn't that fascinating? There would be a full list of Sattvic foods that you can download from our website, usual address www.thelightenergychannel.tv. You may be interested as well in some CDs that we have produced with Chinmayi. She has channeled some beautiful chakra meditations. So there's one CD for each of the chakras, and they're available from our website as CDs and also MP3 downloads. So that's all for me today. Enlighten Energy from me, Claire Wiles. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.